My name is Jeff Stedman. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at SDBI, and really appreciate the opportunity to present to you sort of how we see the media supply chain evolving, and really the role of the cloud in the media supply chain, particularly as things continue to progress and to grow. So Stacy, we will cover some of the cloud here as we talk about the evolution of the media supply chain. So first, let me start first though with some kind of definitions. If you think about the broadest definition you can of the media supply chain, you basically look at all the processes that happen around content production. This is where a lot of that creative work happens to create finished pieces of content. That content then has to go through quite an extensive set of content preparation steps. This is where it's a little more mechanical, less creative, but a lot of work that has to be done to prepare content for distribution. And then, of course, distribution and all the different mechanisms and the evolution of the whole distribution and consumption side of the industry. Today, I'm going to really focus mostly on this content preparation step of the broader kind of media and entertainment workflow, where we're talking about all that processing that has to be done. And if you think about the media supply chain, what we're really talking about is all of those tasks and steps and jobs and processes that are necessary to convert a raw incoming program into a finished piece of content that is packaged up, suitable for the distribution to whatever that destination is. Could be a partner, could be a platform, could be your own direct-to-consumer service. But there's a number of steps. They tend to fall into buckets like ingest and processing, preparation and packaging, and distribution. Those are sort of the high-level steps. And I'm going to get into a little bit more detail in a little bit as to what are the more detailed steps that fall into this media supply chain. But one thing that I think is kind of interesting is, why do we care about media supply chain? Why do we even call it a media supply chain? And I think it really relates to kind of a relative measure of how much content we have to process for distribution. In the early days, you had a single channel. You were a single broadcaster with a channel. It was all over the air. Not much of a supply chain. You're preparing content for one single distribution outlet. Then, of course, we started to see the evolution of multiple channels in cable and satellite, and just a tremendous growth in channels, but still pretty much all linear, all destined for traditional television kind of viewing. And right about that time, we also began as that came around, we began this transition to files. And that was, I think, in many ways, the birth of what I kind of think of as nonlinear, where you had file-based content, you're starting to do localization, you've got some early, PVOD or rental kind of options. But again, you're primarily viewing content on televisions. While I had more options and I was viewing more content, I really was still kind of looking at it on the same device. Fast forward to today, and over the last 5 to 10 years, we've just seen an absolute explosion in the number of distribution platforms, the different types of consumption devices and platforms, and an increasing appetite around the world for content. So increasing globalization of content, really kind of putting a lot of pressure on organizations to meet this demand for content. And I think it was really at this point where the term, people started thinking of it as a media supply chain, because now they're thinking of themselves a little bit like a media factory. I've got so much output I have to get through my factory. How do I do that? And that's where this whole notion of supply chains started to come about. I think that the term and the thinking started to evolve. And so why do we need to kind of improve, and how can we improve? What do we need to meet in terms of our supply chain? So we got a lot more content. It's becoming more specialized. There's a lot more niche. Think of all the pop-up channels that come up. I have more delivery options that I have to deal with, from television to mobile and tablets and smart TVs. I have consumers are consuming content differently. There is the traditional lean back viewing. There's also lean in viewing and binge watching and watching it on demand. Maybe even consuming short form versions. And I know one thing consumers are starting to show is a bit of search fatigue. I don't know how many of you see a great show or you hear of a great show, but you can't find it because it's on this service or it was on that service. And so that's becoming an issue that companies are starting to deal with. And there's just new business models that media companies are pursuing. I've got direct to consumer services from some companies. I have new delivery partnerships. I mean, who would have imagined that A&E would license its content to Discovery? But they did for Discovery Plus because that was a new platform for them. And people are starting to think about new ways of bundling content to make it more palatable to consumers to stay engaged and stay subscribers. So across the spectrum of the industry, there's a lot of changes, a lot of dynamics, and all of that is putting a lot of pressure to produce, package, and deliver more content to more places, but to do it all with not raising costs and maybe even fewer resources. And so this, I think, is what's leading to people to think about, how do I modernize my supply chain so I can meet the dynamics of the market? So let's dive in a little bit and take a look at the steps that are part of the media supply chain at a little more granular level. So it all begins, as all supply chains do, and even in manufacturing, you've got to receive your raw materials so that you can then put them through the factory to create your finished goods. So content receipt is that step in the workflow where my content is coming in. It needs to be received. It needs to be, in many cases, validated and checked. Is it accurate? Is it what I think I'm supposed to be getting? Does it match? And it can be quite messy. This content receipt is a place where a lot of companies deal with a lot of complexity, a lot of noise. They're getting content from dozens to maybe hundreds, in some cases over 1,000 different suppliers who are submitting content into the company for meeting their contractual requirements. But it could come in lots of different formats with different treatment of ancillary data. And so it needs to be received. And then it might go through a normalization step where I'm going to potentially transcode it into a house format or create proxies of that content that I can then work with. So there's generally a step in there, and sometimes it's part of content receipt, sometimes it's a discrete step to go through this normalization process and get my content ready for the rest of the steps that I'm gonna pursue to prepare that content. Also early on is this notion of logging and having someone go through the content to identify essentially points of interest in that content. Looking for things like segment breaks or potential ad breaks or black or color bars or credits or just the various points along a piece of content that you might want to know. So as you do, again, more downstream steps, you've got that information. And regardless of what you're logging, you're really seeking kind of the same result, which is time-based metadata that can then be used downstream to help you finish that product, to create that finished good for your audiences. Increasingly, we're seeing a lot of localization work. This is both the subbing and dubbing, but also could include compliance work and compliance editing, especially as we think about making our content available for international markets. I've got to go through that localization step, create different versions of that piece of content for the different local markets that I'm going for. I may also have to do some modification. I might want to insert ad breaks. I might want to trim it for time. I might want to do some basic, I might have to do some compliance edit and take certain scenes out of a piece of content. So there's There's some modification, again, not a lot of creative work here, more mechanical kind of modification, but there may be things that I want to take out so that that content for whatever platform it's going to is suitable for that platform. And then, of course, packaging for distribution, archiving, you can probably interchange those in terms of where they happen in the sequence, but getting all that content packaged up for the different distribution outlets is an important finishing step. And then putting that content and making it available in my archive, making it searchable is another key element of that supply chain, because I may want to go back and reuse that content over time. Now, the issue with all of those steps in a typical kind of on-premise based sort of infrastructure or facility, I have a lot of duplication of work. I'm doing the same processing by both the suppliers and the distributors on the same piece of content over and over, and I'm repeating QC tasks, and I'm just doing a lot of the same thing over and over, which also means I'm not using my resources very efficiently, both the human resources and the physical infrastructure. It's probably, if it's physical infrastructure, it's probably underutilized because I've probably built up for a worst case scenario. And in a lot of places, the manual operators are doing a lot of repetitive manual tasks that could probably benefit from being more automated. It's also in a typical on-premise kind of infrastructure, it's difficult to respond quickly. As the market changes, it's hard to take that infrastructure you've got and scale it up quickly. It's hard to add on in a very short period of time. Sure, you can do it over time, but you've got to acquire equipment, you've got to install it, test it, get it up and running. And if demand wanes or it goes down, you can't really spin it down very easily. Also, very hard to get visibility into the true unit costs. You know, what's a show cost to prepare through your existing infrastructure? Very hard for people to be able to get to that because you're just dealing with a big pool of capital investment that you're amortizing across a bunch of channels or outlets. And so you get average costs, but you can't really get good unit costs. And I think you're somewhat limited in the tools that you have at your disposal and the jobs that you're going to use those tools on. You basically you're fixed. You made your selection of what transcoder you're going to have or what QC tool you're going to have. And you can't change them very easily or use them on a job by job basis because you've got them in sort of a rigid infrastructure. So let's go back to the content chart that I used before and talk a little bit about the infrastructure that's best fit for this growth of content. So certainly in the early days, on-prem was the right solution. It was very specialized on-premise systems for preparing and transmitting television content. It worked great and really was needed at that time. As the market began to grow, we started to see duplicate infrastructures in some cases, a digital infrastructure being put in side by side to the broadcast infrastructure, or maybe I'd outsource and push my digital through a third party, but keep my on-prem for my linear. But when we get to today's multi-platform world, my argument is really that the cloud is the right infrastructure because it's too expensive to scale your on-premise infrastructure and to do it efficiently. In other words, to do it at the right capacity and for the right level of utilization. Too expensive to outsource, as we're starting to see many companies looking at how do I replace the service provider with my own capabilities, but not my own infrastructure. And so the cloud really is a good fit when you're talking about this kind of scale and this kind of dynamics in the market, because of my ability to scale up quickly or scale down, to change things, and to work at a very granular level. I'll try to talk a little bit more about that. So when we think of a cloud-based media supply chain, what are some of the key elements that make it work? Well, obviously the first one is simple. It's the cloud. You take advantage of a cloud infrastructure for all the media storage, the media processing. You're going to You're going to use the infrastructure that the cloud providers are making available to you on a basically a consumption basis, on an on-demand, use it when you need it, pay for what you use, kind of a model for those resources. And it's infinitely scalable and very fungible, and it responds very quickly to whatever load you throw at it. To go with that, you're going to want applications that have been really tailored to take advantage of the attributes of the cloud. So I think of it as sort of cloud native applications. I know we hear that term a lot, but it really means applications that are set up to be used on a consumption basis, and they take advantage of those properties of the cloud in terms of scalability, being able to spin up, to be able to spin down, to be able to fail over if there's an issue, and really they're containerized and built in such a way that they can adapt and respond quickly to demands as demands are placed on those applications. Another key attribute that you're going to bring into the supply chain is the use of AI and ML and automation. So automated processing on content that's really about using the tools, the AI and ML tools that are available from the cloud, all the various cloud providers, to augment and enrich and extract content metadata, and use that to check content, to identify those points of interest in content. And out of that, you're collecting a massive amount of metadata, and you're going to want to harvest that metadata and use it at every step of the supply chain to guide both automated and manual tasks. So for instance, I could have an AI tool evaluate content for, I don't know, nudity or violence or smoking or alcohol. And at least it tells me where in that content I have a potential objectionable item. So now a manual operator can use that metadata to only look at those points and not have to watch the whole show. They can go immediately to those points of interest, provided they've got this time-based metadata to guide them.
Jeff, if I can interrupt for a second, ML, what is that?
Machine learning, sorry, artificial intelligence and machine learning.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that. I should have said that. And then the last key component is an orchestration layer. So if you're going to be running this infrastructure and spinning things up and spinning things down, managing the metadata, you're going to want some kind of a tool to help with orchestration and resource management. So basically provisioning all the resources that are needed when they're needed, turning them on as demand goes up, turning them off as demand goes down or as jobs finish. Having a platform to kind of manage all of this will really be a key to then helping you get the most out of your media supply chain in the cloud. One other call out I want to call out here is sort of the importance of an application ecosystem. So talked about those cloud native applications, but across the supply chain, there's lots of different tools that you can use. And so the nice thing is, if you have an application ecosystem, you can use different tools for different types of jobs, or different tools depending on the value of content. If you've got a very high value piece of content, you might want to run it through a very high-end transcode operation that might cost more than other transcode applications, but you're getting the absolute best quality for that high value program. You may have other programs that just simply aren't going to be destined for that kind of an audience. And so you might want to use a different lower cost transcode or QC application or audio application. You want the flexibility to choose the right tool for the job. And I think that's one of the kind of key considerations as you build out your media supply chains, is identifying what are the tools that I'm going to want to use to run that processing on the different points and different steps in my supply chain. Now let me give a kind of an example. Let's take that content receipt process and take a look at sort of how does it kind of happen in a traditional on-premise process versus a cloud-based process. And so if I got an on-premise facility, I'm going to have my media delivered to my facility either by mail or by a file delivery, a file transfer. That media is going to be received, and then I'm going to pass that off to a MAM operator. The MAM operator is going to check it into a system and database, my MAM system, and then tell the QC operator to, go through and review that content for quality and technical checks on the media. And that manual operator will review that content. And when they determine that it's okay, they will pass that content and it will be ready for the next steps in the supply chain. So multiple manual touch points in that process. You take that to sort of the cloud-based and automated process. I could have my media delivered directly to the cloud via file delivery, maybe some kind of a gateway or a portal into my cloud-based storage environment. I'm going to run an automated process to check that content for technical accuracy. So I'm going to essentially auto-evaluate that content. Does it meet the technical specs that I expect for this content? I'm then going to run an automated QC process to run through the content, looking for whatever the markers are that you want to define as in terms of passing QC. So black, silence, any kind of error in the video, and if it passes, it can pass directly into the next steps of the supply chain. Right, it can be forwarded right to whatever you're going to do next with that content. If there's issues, you can then present the QC operator with that time-based metadata to tell the operator, here are the issues that I found in that content. And now the operator is only checking those points in time. They're not reviewing the whole content. Now, the bonus is you end up getting time-based metadata because it can give you, segments and scene change detection and different things that you might do as part of that QC pass that you'll keep with the media and you might use downstream. And I have a result here. This is an actual calculation by someone who went through this exercise to migrate a fairly intensive content receipt process. And they estimated that they had reduced their manual touches by up to 80% for incoming content. They were able to run that content through the content receipt process without a human touching it up to 80% of that time that they were before. So a tremendous kind of result of running their process through the cloud and through automated processing. Let's talk a little bit about kind of the comparison of a legacy supply chain to kind of a more modern cloud-based supply chain. I think one of the first things that stands out is the visibility that you get with a cloud-based, because every step in that chain is a transaction, is a step that can be monitored, it can be watched, it can be measured in terms of time, and it can be measured in terms of cost. So you've got very good visibility into how long it takes and how much it's costing for every step in a supply chain. And that's a lot more visibility than you get out of a legacy supply chain where you just simply don't have the data. And you also don't have good visibility into where are things bottlenecked, where are my inefficiencies in my supply chain. One of the things that a cloud-based supply chain will give you is a lot of data that you can use to then guide where do I need to focus my optimization efforts? Where can I identify points in my supply chain where content is backing up? I'm not using the right tool. I'm running into consistent errors, and you can diagnose where those inefficiencies are and continue to iterate and make your operations more efficient. You also get the ability to choose the right tool for every job, and you can switch those tools very quickly, depending on what's working best for the type of content that you're running through the supply chain, how much you want to spend. You've got a lot more flexibility around the applications that you're using to do the work that's part of that supply chain. And the other thing you end up with is you can automate a lot of the tasks And then you basically are converting your manual operations from having to go through everything to only having to focus on the exceptions. And you're able to use the automated tools to find things that need attention, and then have the humans focus only on those points of attention. I don't have a stat here, but I know there is another organization I'm familiar with that went through this process, and they were able to take essentially a review of content that used to take 2 hours for every hour of content down to 20 minutes for every hour of content. So another huge swing in efficiency by taking advantage of the tools and focusing the human work on only what was needed. And at the end of the day, what do you end up with as you go through this process? Well, you're going to end up with a supply chain that's going to give you agility, efficiency, and a level of intelligence you might not have had before. So when I say agility, what I mean is your organization can react faster. You can respond to market dynamics. You can accelerate your time to revenue. You've got this elastic infrastructure that will scale up or scale down as needed to meet whatever the business requirements are, and you've got the freedom to choose the right tool at any time. So you've got a lot of resiliency and responsiveness that you can build into your operations to be able to react to whatever the business throws at the operations team. You certainly can become more efficient. You've got the right resources assigned to the value of the content. You can automate repetitive tasks. You can have people focus really where they're going to truly add value. You're basically just going to dramatically increase your content throughput for a given amount of resources. And then this intelligence is really about insight and gaining the visibility and the insight into what the things cost, how much time is it going to take, and not only in terms of measuring what happened, but also being able to build predictive models to say, how much is it going to cost to tackle this library of content, or how much time is it going to take me to run this amount of content through this set of processes. And you're able to kind of make better decisions because you can take that information and it becomes actionable. It becomes information that you can use to move forward and to decide whether to do something or not to do something. And that's kind of one of the things, where do we see these supply chains going? I think we're at the point where we certainly have real-time observability across every step in the supply chain. We can see where the bottlenecks are today. We can find where the errors are happening, and we can fix them. We're also starting to get enough data where we can accurately model new opportunities, new scenarios. How much will it cost to process that library of content? How much does it make sense to do this content deal? Is there enough revenue to counteract the cost of having to process that content? We're not here. We're almost to the stage where we get to prescriptive analytics, where we're able to kind of automatically adjust supply chain processes based on real-time feedback. We're certainly getting data to tell us where can we make some changes, but we have had places where content that came from XYZ supplier was going to a specific transcoder, kept hitting errors. So we were able to change that transcoder, and now that content is flowing through the supply chain without problem. So we can start to be a little more prescriptive about how do we adjust the supply chain processes based on the feedback that we're getting as we're running content through that supply chain. And I think where we want to get to is this idea of a fully connected, interchangeable kind of supply chain, where I've got I'm connecting my suppliers and my distributors, and I'm pre-formatting content so that it meets the requirements of the destination, of the recipient. And so when a content supplier sends me content to ingest into my supply chain, it comes in already automatically formatted for the way that I want it to run through my supply chain. And so it's always received kind of exactly in the format and the packaging that's required. Now, we're not here yet. This is where I think supply chains are going. But when we talk to folks about where a lot of the pain points are, it's in that exchange of content from one company to another. And how can we use in more of an automated, more of a connected set of supply chains to make that content exchange a lot more efficient. So I think I'll start to wrap up here a little bit with this notion of supply chain as a differentiator. And you might say, how can your supply chain be a differentiator? Well, media companies differentiate by giving consumers what they want. What do consumers want? They want the best content and they want the best experience. And so, the best content comes from all the content production deals that you do, and in getting that creative process to produce really interesting, compelling content. Content distribution, including the apps that are part of a D2C kind of experience, a D2C service, are really about how do I make that content available to consumers the way that consumers want to consume it, in a way that's easy for them to find and easy for them to consume. Now, I would argue that the more that you can optimize your supply chain, you're going to free up resources to focus on those other areas and deliver what those consumers are looking for. You're going to be able to give that consumer a better experience by having a supply chain that can run lots of content through it very fast, make that content available sooner than you could otherwise, to give that consumer more of what they want. So just to kind of wrap up, clearly the demand for content by consumers, especially globally, the international demand for content is driving an imperative to optimize media supply chains and to be able to meet the dynamics of the market. I think along with that, the scale and the variability that's associated with the media processing demands really does make cloud infrastructure the best option, because it delivers that kind of responsiveness and that elasticity that you want, as well as very efficient utilization. You're only paying for what you use. You're only spinning up what you need to meet that demand for content. And lastly, I think turning your supply chain into a cloud-based consumption model really will give you that agility to respond faster, a more efficient use of resources, and the kind of insight and intelligence that you'll get at a unit level that you've never had before. And so you end up becoming that more agile, more efficient, more intelligent operations when you're able to take advantage of this kind of a cloud-based model. And with that, I will say thank you.
Well, we have a ton of questions, I'm sure, because I have a bunch of them. Does anybody want to start with whatever they want to ask? If not, I'll start on a couple. So I've been working on a project that works with this. It's really moving control stations acquisitions of media to hubs, and then it's feeding out to the station. It's pretty much using the cloud. One of the things we found is your databases becomes incredibly critical. Keeping an accurate database that can keep track of where all your assets are is very important. Also, so is having your transcoding, so you have very standardized video formats. What we found is, and I'm sure you found it, Jeff, is you get video from so many different sources, and there are so many different formats, data rates, formats, etc. It can cause problems if you don't keep control of it. Yeah. You also mentioned the whole concept. The concept is to be able to ingest it once and be able to distribute it to a number of places. One of the challenges of that is, and you mentioned it, is that you may have an asset, a media. If it's going to go and it's going to be streamed at 4K, you want one data rate, and if it's going to be streamed into cell phones, you really don't need that 70 or 80 megabit trying to get to a cell phone. It won't work. Let's see. I just made notes while you were talking, so sorry. You can also automate the downloads, which is very important. very helpful as we get more and more media. We had a meeting already about one of the problems with having all your media in the cloud, and more importantly, having all your media on computer is computer security. Sinclair in October found that out the hard way. They got hit with a massive attack. Also, when I was talking to somebody at a station, the importance, if you're going to be using the cloud and if you're going to be using the internet for your stuff, having having two ways to get to the internet, having backup, having protection is very critical. And there's other challenges that come up with all of this. You'll find that you cannot transfer data at high speed over long distance unless you go with some special software, like Signiant was one of the programs you listed. Aspera is another one that allows you to take full use of your network speed. I think, and I'm just trying to read my notes, and I think that's the those are the notes that I made while you were talking.
Yeah, all good points, and for sure your comment about the complexity of ingest and then getting that content into a more normalized house format, if you will, or something like that to be able to work with. That is one of the most significant pain points that we hear, especially from the larger media companies. Is it just everything comes in different, needs to be put through the same system in order to do something with it.
Yeah, the other thing with as we get larger media companies, think of larger media conglomerates, they only want to ingest that material once and be able to send it to 10, 20, 30, 40, or 50 or more places. They don't want to have to do it that many times and have each station handle their own media.
Yeah. Yeah, being able to do that ingest once and then fan out to all of your different distribution is absolutely a key outcome of kind of an automated supply chain. Yeah.
And one of the things you'll find when you automate, it's terrific if you've crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's and made sure that everything was right. Otherwise, you could just have huge problems on your hands.
Hello, Jeff.
Yeah, hi, Bob.
Hi. My question, I actually typed it in as you were presenting, so you actually answered my question about AI machine learning to make a first pass at logging, identifying bars, slates, segments, start and end, presence of program audio versus tone or silence. Do you have a recommendation of a standout product in that field that really hits the center of the dartboard as far as accuracy and timeliness?
What's interesting is it's a moving goalpost, and what I mean by that is AWS recognition can be good at detecting scene changes or detecting objects or certain things, and then one of the other, Microsoft's video indexer, will leapfrog it, and so they kind of leapfrog. And we actually have we've had customers who use basically the tools from the three major cloud providers to do that kind of the AI ML pass on that content, but they change them based on who they think at that moment in time is the most advanced or the most accurate. And so they'll switch from Google to Microsoft, or Microsoft to AWS, AWS back to Microsoft. They'll kind of change. But we have a lot of customers that are using the AWS recognition to do a pass of that kind of content detection I think and you could set a confidence interval on that, so you can make it really high, which means you'll get a lot more false positives because it's going to try to make sure that it's catching what you're looking for. That's probably the one we have the most interaction with, the most involvement.
And then going out on a limb, do you know if there's any in that software family that is, for example, used to documentarians to go through large amounts of B-roll or of archive material that they may not necessarily have shot, so that they're really not familiar with what's there, in order to spot what might be long shots versus close-ups versus pans and so on.
That one I'm not too sure about, like who's doing a good job of that. I can certainly ask around some of the other folks in the company to see if I can get a better answer on that.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Hi, Jeff. This is Carl Paulson.
Hey, Carl.
How are you doing? Good to see you.
Good, thank you.
So I think it's interesting you made mention of the word supply chain frequently, and specifically to the media reference. It's interesting, and I'd gather your opinion on this, or love to hear your opinion on this, with the somewhat negative term that's being applied to supply chain right now. Is that the right thing to be calling this, or is there something better? And the other question was actually more serious, and that was, you described elastic media, and I'd like to understand better what you mean by that. Thanks.
Elastic media?
Yeah, I think you was mentioned in the well, just elasticity in general. We sort of.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. If I said elastic media, I probably misspoke. What I mean when I say elasticity is the elasticity of the cloud, in terms of being able to scale up or scale down on demand, and that sort of ability to have as much or as little infrastructure as you need at any moment in time. That's kind of what I mean by the elasticity comment.
Makes sense.
Okay. And on the supply chain word, yeah, you're right. I did think about that a little bit. With all the troubles in the physical supply chains, should we be using that term? But at the end of the day, supply chains are about how do you get products to people, and our industries, like every other one, there's an insatiable demand for more content. And I do think, thinking of it from a kind of supply chain perspective, even if that word is a little bit negative now because other supply chains aren't running as well as they should be, I still think it's the right way to think about getting all of this content ready for all the different outlets, because you have to think of it as a factory getting this content out. It's and so I'm okay with it, but I hear the issue with the word given the current state of things.
I know it has a pretty big impact on a lot of folks right now. So thanks.
Sure does. I guess one thing that's kind of nice is with the cloud infrastructure, you're not really at the mercy of the supply chain of your equipment suppliers. That's AWS's and Google and Microsoft's problem to figure that out, and they're first in line. So they get what they need to keep that infrastructure available for you. I've heard some horror stories of folks who need replacement drives or something like that, and they're really down the list, and so the supply chain is hurting their ability to get replacement parts. And that is one of the nice things about thinking of it in the cloud, is the cloud providers are taking care of that headache for you.
Just to give you a word of reference, I'm on a project right now trying to get computer servers, and HP and other companies are talking about 6 months to a year.
Wow. Yeah.
One of the other things about being in the cloud is one of the aspects so many people forget about this business is protection against disaster recovery. I've seen people with all of their material on a set of drives, and the drives go bad, or a fire or something. So it's really handy to have it in the cloud where you're protected.
Yeah, if again, this is back to how you architect the way you use the cloud. But if you follow the recommendations in terms of multi availability zones and even multi-region, depending on how you want to approach that whole business continuity topic, you really can take advantage of the way the cloud's built to replicate content, replicate data, even replicate processing. Again, it's a cost curve. You have to kind of figure out how much do you want to spend to have, what kind of business continuity. But at a minimum, when your data is in the cloud, that data is replicated for you and protected from a single drive failure or even single data center failure.
Anybody else, please jump in.
Elaborating on what Jack was saying, are there specific either products or protocols that you recommend for getting data from local facilities to and from the cloud?
Well, as we kind of mentioned, we support a number of different tools that are used to kind of accelerate that file transfer. So, there's already integrations with Signiant and with Aspera. You can also use, depending on your facility, you can contract with the cloud providers for a direct connection, which is also it gives you more bandwidth and a dedicated connection between your facility and the cloud provider, so you can do that kind of migration using basically a dedicated circuit.
But I would also point out with that that if you are sending large amounts of data, long shows and so forth, you're going to need some form of acceleration, whether it's Signiant, Aspera, or any one of the other companies. And with that, I will say, Jeff, thank you very much. I appreciate it. We are recording this meeting, and we will have it up on our YouTube channel, hopefully within a week. So I want to thank everyone. And if you have anything for us you would like to see as a meeting in the future, or if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us.